Hey, this is your Great Lakes dude, Jeff Liskay, coming to you on the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where we're going to be going rage angler on all things Great Lakes, from gear, fly, big water, and swinging flies, of course. If it concerns the Great Lakes, we've got you covered, so stay tuned to this next episode.
Here we go. Our main man, Jeff Liskay, is back on the podcast, and he is going to continue on the deep dive into all things Great Lakes. Today's episode is an extra special episode because we have Jeff's first interview on the podcast. Let's listen in and find out who is Jeff's special Great Lakes guest this week. As always, you can connect with Jeff or I anytime. Let us know if you're loving the podcast, and it's an open door if you have any questions focused on the Great Lakes.
Today's episode is sponsored by Mavrk Fly Fishing. They make the lightest Euro nymphing reel in the world, which makes your rod more sensitive, casting more accurate, and you can hold your dead drifts longer without shoulder burn. Check out Mavrk Fly Fishing Stinger and their other Euro nymph products and support this podcast by heading over to wetflyswing.com/Mavrk right now. That's Mavrk, M-A-V-R-K, wetflyswing.com/Mavrk. Check out the lightest and most unique Euro nymphing reel right now.
Today's episode is sponsored by Eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton Territory, Idaho's most renowned zone for fly fishing, from the Henry's Fork to the South Fork of the Snake and all the high alpine lakes and streams in between. Yellowstone Teton Territory provides anglers and other outdoor enthusiasts with all the information they need to plan their next big trip. You can visit wetflyswing.com/Teton right now to get the full list of outfitters, lodges, fly shops, and all kinds of inspiration to get you started on your next trip to Eastern Idaho. That's Teton, T-E-T-O-N, wetflyswing.com/Teton. Let's get into it with our Great Lakes guru, the dude, Jeff Liskay.
Hey, everyone. This is Jeff Liskay, Great Lakes dude here. Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Great Lakes podcast. I'm super stoked to start diving into chatting with some of the Great Lakes anglers. You know, some are pros, some are not, some are just downright fishy anglers. Today's episode, I'm going to be chatting with one of the best shallow water fly anglers around. You know, we connected because of our love of the freshwater drum. We think it's a way cool fish that eats chicken feathers, but interestingly enough, that there's a lot of people that call them trash fish, sadly to say. That being said, I'd like you to welcome Dave Hurley to our show. Dave is a skinny water specialist that runs Skinny Water Safari Guide Service. Dave roams the backwaters of the Great Lakes, based out of the Lower Peninsula, Michigan, where he pulls his way through the miles of skinny water flats, sight fishing for a wide variety of warm water species out of his towee boat. Welcome, Dave, to the show.
Jeff, thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Way cool, man, Dave. Greatly appreciate you coming on, and can't wait to start picking your brain. You know, before we dive into some fishy talk, you know, why don't you give us a little background and update on how you ended up in the Great Lakes and started chasing fish around this area, man?
Yeah, man. I'm a transplant from California, born and raised. Grew up in Cali, fishing since I can remember. I mean, my dad took me fishing as early as I can remember, and always been really into water and fish. And our big water out there is the Pacific Ocean. So I grew up fishing inland lakes in California for all kinds of stuff, bass, trout, and then the surf in the ocean. And also charter trips into the ocean stuff in the Pacific. But, you know, eventually found fly fishing and kind of discovered a small community of people that fly fished in the surf along the Pacific for croaker species, Corbina, which Corbina is probably the most popular fish, barred surfperch, and my little niche as I kind of got into it and kind of went deep was the Spotfin Croaker, which is it's not, you don't hear about it as much. It's kind of a more rare catch. They're more southern Pacific coast down into Baja, and there's yellowfin croaker that run the surf, and Spotfin Croaker and Corbina, and they're all related. They all kind of look similar, more like a redfish, smaller. They don't get huge, kind of a little bit longer, slender. The Corbina especially is more slender and long. If you haven't seen one, they're kind of silver They call them the ghost of the coast. But you can sight fish for these fish in skinny water, and they're designed to ride the waves in along the sand, and it's clear water. There's foam and waves and stuff like this, but you find the right beach stretch and the incoming tide, and you can sight fish to them, and they're super challenging. I mean, you have to throw a lot of skill at them, and even then, the most competent anglers, will scratch their heads most days and come out empty-handed. And there's a handful of guys that get it done very consistently with Corbina, but Spotfin Croaker are taking that to a whole nother level of it's such a badge of honor to catch one of those fish. And I became obsessed with them. I just happened to. Some of the water that I fished had populations of them during certain times of year. And I, being the kind of right brain creative that I am, just figured out some flies. I think the revelation for that was for a fly that I had sort of made up or come up with for the Spotfin Croaker specifically was after I had thrown the whole kitchen sink at a pod of them, I put on a little stonefly nymph. And I just happened to have one in I had a chest pouch, the dorky, one that opens up. And I caught the biggest spotfin in the pack, and it just sparked this whole thing. I started tying my own little nymph flies with tungsten bead heads, real small, smaller than anything you would ever I would ever throw, or any of the people that I fished would ever throw for Corbina. And I started catching them more consistently and turning other people on, and we have buddies that still catch them to this day. Fast forward, I met my wife, my future wife, who is from Michigan, and was ready for a change. We saved up a little nest egg, and we knew we didn't want to live in California for the rest of our lives. And while I was with her, prior to getting married, we had visited the Great Lakes in Michigan, and it's where her family is. And I kind of really started enjoying it out here. I mean, every time we'd come, we'd camp and go explore, and I really liked Detroit, to be honest. I thought it was an interesting city, and so we decided to move, and I ended up out here, and lo and behold, found the freshwater drum. The first one I ever saw, I was actually I had gotten off work, and I grabbed I had a rod. I worked kind of nearby Lake St. Clair, and I found this canal, and I was walking the canal looking for bass, and I thought I was hallucinating, man. I was looking down at the Spotfin Croaker. It freaked me out. And I casted to it, and I stripped, and it ate the fly, and I caught it. And I was like, I took 1,000 pictures of it. I posted all this stuff, and I'd forgotten that I'd heard about what they were. I knew what it was, but I didn't know it would look so much like a freshwater drum. And I went back to Jerry Darkus's book, Inland Oceans, and he had written about them, and I had read that book. So I just I thought, okay, this is amazing. I am just beside myself that there's this fish, and I didn't know at the time that nobody was into this fish. Everybody hated it. I did not know that. I was completely I had found something that I was intent on pursuing, and just a continuation of me in California. And it just clicked with me that you could probably catch them on a flat, sight fishing, and that's what I was used to doing anyways for its cousin, the saltwater cousins. And so yeah, man, long story short, I sold a few things, and I bought a little tiny John boat that was made out of fiberglass, and I had a buddy build this beautiful cedar poling platform. This is I've never pulled anything in my life. I've never owned a boat in my life. He built this amazing platform. It was gorgeous, and this boat was tiny. It was it was the wrong boat to build a platform like this on, but I didn't know any better. And it had a little deck. It was probably a 12-foot John. And it was made out of fiberglass. It's really light. Had the gunnels were probably, not even a foot off the water. And I strapped a Yeti to the front, I strapped I had the platform built, and then I had a window cleaner extension that I bought at Home Depot. That I used as a push pole for for about a year, and we just went out and tried to do it, and we ended up doing it. We ended up fishing and catching fish, and I remember telling buddies like, "Hey, man, like they were, like let's go fish the river for smallies," and it's like, "Hey, actually, you want to go try to fish for drum?" Like, and everyone kind of like, "Sure, I guess it sounds interesting," and they come out, and I would see them light up like, "This is amazing!" Like, wow, and slowly but surely kind of over the years, and I got my towee boat, which was the best thing I mean, I just love my boat so much. It's been incredible for me, and that was my next venture into kind of stepping up my game, and over the years I got a legit pole, and learned technique and approach, and kind of dialed it in, and it really comes. I don't know, man. It just we can expand on that, but getting back to the drum, that initial excitement over that fish came purely from my saltwater experience in California. That's how I kind of got there.
Man, that's pretty cool. It's just like you said, Dave. It's like so many people, when you say, "Hey, let's go throw a fly for drum," they look at you and they're like, "Really?" But then once you get them on the boat or get them someplace and they finally like experience it, they're like, "This is the best thing ever," right? It's like,
right.
It's like crazy. It's like, okay, then they're like, "Well, when can we do this again?" So, and that's how we connected, was the drum. But both myself and we both are like this explorer, cutting edge. It's like I find my best days where I don't even like catch fish, right? Because you learn more. But so besides the drum, the Great Lakes, you chase them up and down all along the shoreline in Lake Michigan and Huron and all over. Paint us a little short picture of like what a normal day would be like when you go out fishing, and if it's just for drum or whatever, but just like a normal little day, that what you can expect when you go out skinny water fishing.
Yeah. So it's hard to sum up, man. I think one of the really interesting things, and it's challenging, it's fun, it's nonstop. We cover a lot of water, and it's one of these weird things where it's very easy to go out on my boat and for a whole day and not want to drink or eat, because you're just in the moment. It's a pure existentialism. You're just looking at that water, and you see how things just emerge, like things just happen. You're looking in this aquarium, and it's the Great Lakes. It doesn't matter where you are on the Great Lakes. There's a part of the Great Lakes just about everywhere in the coastline that has this element, and all of it's different, but that's the beauty of it, right? There's so many miles of unexplored places. I have water that I know like the back of my hand. So we are just moving into these territories and these zones where you could have, a habitat that you're kind of pushing into that has carp, and all of a sudden you're fishing to these carp, but at the same time, on the periphery of that, there's a pod of bass that are moving in. So as an angler, you're in this mode of thinking, or as a beginner angler, even, you're learning how to fish to a carp. And then all of a sudden you have me at the back of the boat yelling, "Pick up your fly, cast it 15 feet to your left," or, you're 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, sorry. And basically, strip it as fast as you can. And so at the same time, you have to switch in your head so quickly to get this bass that's only there for a split second. It's curious, it's coming in, and it's just constantly, that stuff's always happening. There's always something new. As somebody's fishing to a bowfin, I have in my eye a carp that's in the distance, that's nose down. So I'm kind of like, all right, if that doesn't work out, we're gonna bank right and go hit this carp, and it's just, I mean, it's just a conveyor belt of these scenarios, and each one's different. You approach each one differently. Each fish is different. The spectrum of fish that we fish to It's grown over the years, but the bowfin is kind of the most forgiving, although they're super fun. You can get right up on them. You have a lot of time to approach them, to plan out your approach. They oftentimes just play ball. And even if you hook them a couple times, even they will bite a third, fourth time. They're still looking for that meal after they've been hooked. Whereas carp, obviously, you have a very short window, to get that done as getting within proximity of that carp. If that carp's in vegetation that you can't really cast to, we have to get to a vertical situation. So we're getting in position, moving really slowly, and you get sort of one shot at these carp, and it has to be just right, and you get rewarded from that. But it's more difficult. Drum are also very difficult at times. And every drum's different. Every drum has a different little attitude, or is in a different mood. And you learn the body language of these fish, and you know which ones are going to play and how they're going to play. And you're constantly breaking it down. You're constantly making decisions, and hopefully they're the right ones. But it's okay if it's not, because again, we're just moving another 40 feet and we have another opportunity. It's really fun. It's something else.
Yeah, it sounds a little silly, but I'm the same way. As you go through these little ecosystems, thank goodness for rod socks, because you got them all rigged up and you're like, there's a bass, right? So you grab this other rod that has another fly on it, and you're just in this total state of chaos, like you said, but it's sort of like the planned chaos in a way, right?
Yeah, it is a planned chaos. And I do have flies that work for everything. So I have one fly that'll work for everything. We try to really kind of narrow that down. I have expanded. I bring typically now 5 rods, and that just the most recent addition was a musky rod, because we have actually now I can say I've caught a musky on the flats, sight fish, and that was probably one of the most epic days that I've ever had on the flats. And that was luckily with my best friend who came out from California, and he's a really good angler. So he's just like me. We're 2 peas in a pod. Just we go real hard. But the first fish of the day was about I'd say a 15 to 20 pound carp. The second fish of the morning was a high 40s musky. We didn't have a tape measure in the boat, but it was a musky.
Oh my
Third
gosh.
fish was a bowfin. Fourth fish was a really nice smallie, and then it just the day just progressed from there. It was just sun up to sundown, just nonstop.
That's like the grand slam of all grand slams of the Great Lakes, right?
Unbelievable. Yeah, it was unreal. I put a little reel on my Instagram of that day, and shot the video of him. He actually hooked that muskie, and the hook slipped. The muskie swam about 10 feet and then just laid down again. And we were able to position ourselves to where he could take that fly and just bring it right by its face again. And it chomped the fly right again, like within minutes. And he was able to catch it and reel it in or get it to the net. So that was amazing. So yeah, we now have a musky rod rigged up, ready to go on the towee, on the flats. And that's not the only musky I've seen. I've seen several, and the majority of them I didn't have a musky rod. So now I will always have one.
Yeah.
But we have.
What's your go-to? Like 7 weights, 8 weights?
So I love fishing a 6 weight. I'm privy to a 6 weight. 7 weights are nice too. There are days where I'll have a 7 weight with a popper for bass. We get into some scenarios where I know there's a bass, and it's just really nice because we have these resident flats bass in different areas too. You come across, you're just seeing them, and you're like, oh, these bass are just hanging out in this area. So let's just throw a popper to them and have fun, have that option. So that's nice. And so I'll throw that on a 7 weight. But my go-to for drum, for bowfin, I get a little sketched out with some of the big carp with a 6 weight. But I reeled in some 20 pounders with fought 20 pounders with my 6 weight. You just have to kind of finesse them. But yeah, for right now, the carp have been my most recent real focus. and I've gone up to a 10 weight for them, just because of the vegetation, especially when we start getting into July. The landscape just constantly changes as the summer progresses. And these carp along the shoreline have way more vegetation to run into in July than they do in late June. So we kind of have to step up our heavy gear to button down on them and get them out of that stuff.
What's on the working end, Dave? Like from your leader down to your tippet, like I'm sure you have some stealthy rig, but what's the okay?
No, I'll go up to 15 on a carp. But typically my go-to is 12. And if they're being really spooky, I'll do 10. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff for them to run through. So anything less than that is not realistic. I know some diehards that only fish 8-pound tests for carp, and kudos to them. But out there on the flats, it's a little different.
You stretching out the dog leash like leader length over 9 feet to for stealth, or what are you doing for leader length?
There's an interesting sort of zone that I like to stay within, and that's about 7 to 9, because especially even for carp, there are lots of scenarios where we're casting to them, but when we're casting to them, they are the happiest carp you've ever seen. They are nose down. They're doing headstands and eating. When we're fishing to kind of more settled carp that aren't or are in between, a lot of times they're in structure. They're in a grouping of lily pads around some sort of reeds. And so we can get pretty close to them. We can actually scoot the boat in real slow, and it's a technique, a polling technique that I applied to where I really just I'm every time that pole reaches the end, I'm pulling it completely out of the water. I'm adjusting it in my hand. It's not dragging through anything. Then I'm gently, gingerly setting it back down. I'm getting right in there, and then we're kind of just parking the boat and just inching it over to where the person on the bow, the angler on the bow, can reach and get that full distance with that 9-foot rod and go vertical on that fish and just drop it down. And that's how we can coax some of those carp that are not really that are kind of more curious or more investigative. They're not actually eating to eat. And you just, again, sometimes in that scenario, it takes a different fly to get it done. But the fly we use for drum and bass and bowfin, in all colors, mind you, I've fished fluorescent yellow flies to carp, and they've moved 4 feet on it and eaten it. Big, kind of articulated little bottom goby flies. So if they're in the right mood, they will hoover up just about anything with the right approach. We use a lot of drag and drop, so it does help to have that 9-foot leader. And if you're dragging and dropping the fly, oftentimes, again, the fish is downward oriented, so I'm not too concerned with the line hitting the water over the fish, the fly line. But in those scenarios, it would be nicer to have a longer leader, because you can not worry about that at all. But it doesn't really lend itself to the versatility of the fishery, because having that super long leader will hinder a lot of other scenarios.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can, with the electric bow mount, I can't stealthily get them onto them. So you can position yourself and work your way in, where I sort of have to stake out, and I sort of just wait until they move to me, or I have to really be patient. And it's really hard for clients to carp fish with a boat with an electric motor, because we have to be way more patient than you stealthily pulling onto it. So there's a huge advantage.
But also,
also
very effective though. I've done that, and that does pay off when you just stay there and you see their line. You can sometimes see the way they're moving around, and just hang on, they will come. But even then, the water that we fish, for the most part, I fish different water. There's places where I fish where the water is very murky, and it's shallow enough or skinny enough that you can still see the carp, and you can make out just about everything on that carp, even though it's muddy water. and that allows you to get close and still, well, I actually allows you to stake out and have the carp come and feed right next to you. Whereas in the clear water, for some reason, they are more oriented to using their eyeballs. And so they will eventually see your presence. It is, if you're still as can be, they will still look up and see the shadow of the boat. It doesn't look natural to them. Even if it's just a little bit of like wind blowing, that stuff hitting the side of the boat, as much as you don't think it makes a difference, sometimes when they're getting close to you, they're not going to just settle down. You got a little bit of a window, but yeah, so it's challenging, but I prefer to move. It does keep everybody, happy, and keeps my mind going.
Yeah, engaging, right?
Yeah.
Fly fishing is always in full swing at Drifthook. Let Drifthook Fly Fishing outfit you with the perfect assortment of flies to prepare for your next adventure. Everything from nymphs to dry flies, hoppers to streamers, and their Euro-nymph fly kits all are pre-packed in a double-sided water-resistant fly box. These kits ship free directly to your door, ready to start catching some fish. If you're starting out or just looking for additional tips to help you catch more fish, Drifthook.com has over 50 instructional videos and over 200 articles to help you improve your fly fishing game. And I want to reiterate this fact right here that Drifthook has a great resource at the website. Matt has put together some awesome blog posts. And these aren't just flabby blog posts. They are packed with lots of great content to help you on your next adventure, wherever it takes you this year. With over 150 verified 5-star reviews and a 30-day money-back guarantee, Drifthook's family-owned business has you covered. You can order right now at drifthook.com and use the code SWING at checkout to get 15% off your first order. That's Drifthook, DRIFTHOOK, drifthook.com, and use SWING, SWING, at checkout to get 15% off your first order. You support this podcast and a great small company right now by checking out that link at Drifthook.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about water, water temperatures and fish species. This year has been extremely challenging for myself. This has been, normally we should be skyrocketing over 70 degrees by end of June. In a lot of my home waters, I'm still under 70. And I know it's affected my, presentations. It's affected the way I've been guiding. But in general, opposite this year, what would be like water temps that you're looking for, Dave, to really start things off? And, what's the key there maybe?
You know what? It's funny. I don't really even pay attention to water temps. We're sight fishing. The fish are either there or they're not. And honestly, I know from my experiences that I can, early spring. So in May, when we're fishing for bass, I know that there's bowfin, and I know where they are. And I see them occasionally in random places, but those are flats fish we can go pull to. We can take a break from fishing to pre-spawn bass and go on different flats that warm up obviously faster than the rest of the lake. But I know kind of when the temps are good enough for smallmouth bass to stage for pre-spawn, I know that there's bowfin on flats. And occasionally you'll find early carp there too. Those carp, I have not caught them yet. They're hard to catch. But no drum. Drum don't really come until mid-June. And I'm not one of those data collectors with water temperature. My data collection and also barometric pressure and moon phases and things like that. I love that for musky. I do know that it does affect, especially drum, the barometric pressure changes. Absolutely does. There's days where they just are shut. Their mouths are just locked shut. There's days where they're feeding voraciously. And I think that has a lot to do with the change of the barometric pressures. Temperature wise though, it's just not something I factor into my days because we're looking for fish, and we find them and we fish to them. And the months that I really do it, I know that they're there, and I've consistently seen them in different stretches, different parts of the Great Lakes, all up and down Michigan.
Okay, because do you find that like if the water, like you have a cold morning, like I find like a cold morning, in early season, I will stay off the flats. And then as that water starts to spike and the sun gets up, those fish will actually come up on the flats to feed. Where normally in the morning I could visit that flat. It's like, nope, it's like nobody home, ghost town.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
No, that's true. But that's just the general progression of the day.
Right.
I'm not thinking of I'm not testing the water temperature or anything like that and using that data to affect the way I fish. But absolutely, I know for sure that certain places warm up faster than others. That's something that I do consider. And as the temperatures progress, which flats will kind of be the last ones to fill in. And then there's obviously, it's been a challenging beginning for sure for me too, in that some of the flats this last weekend, I was very surprised that there wasn't more drum. However, we did find a lot of bowfin, so that was okay.
Right. So it's interesting. I was out in the same area that you were, not in the skinnies, but the water temperature dropped below 70 because of the cold nights, and the drum fishing was fairly slow. So usually if I can get it to go 70 to 73, the drum bites on. So that would make sense because we struggled with drum until the afternoon. But so we chat a little bit about water clarity, and you're looking for some that has mystery water. You approach that different. Some is vodka clear, which most of the time it is. But maybe is there a time that you choose one over the other, or is it just like as you're working through the ecosystem, you take advantage of what Mother Nature gives you for the day?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of just taking what Mother Nature gives us, and that's a big part of it. There's always, again, even with the murky situation versus clear water, we had this last weekend we had a couple giant pods of carp that were feeding, and they murkied up the water to where it was zero visibility in a certain area. And we knew that's when you start seeing that milky water, you're pulling along and the water's getting milky, and you look off in the distance, you see that opaque water that just looks like chocolate milk. You're like, that's where the pod of carp are feeding. And in that pod of carp, you have drum that also associate with the carp. And so what we do is then we pull over there really slowly, not to scare anybody, and we work the periphery of that. We work where the muddy water meets the clear water, because you can't find Italian carp in chocolate milk. It needs to be somewhat dissipated a little bit. So then you find those carp that kind of scoot onto the outskirts, and you get shots at them there. And then also we'll see drum, and sometimes we'll just strip a fly through the cloud and kind of strip it in or tick it in a way, or sometimes I'll put even rattles in the fly just to help them find it. I have flies with rattles. And sometimes you'll hook up to a drum like that. You won't ever hook up to a carp doing that, but the drum get in there thick. They kind of all associate with each other when they're feeding that voraciously, usually on the shoulders of spring and fall is when you see those pods. And as the flats heat up, they kind of break away and feed a little bit more in smaller groups where you can fish to them a little easier. However, carp from a towee, carp from a boat pulling was something that I actually struggled with for many years. And Luke Anner has a guide service out of, I believe it's Wisconsin. I'm not sure exactly, but he's another angler that's really into carp, and he guides carp out of a towee boat. I heard him on a podcast, and he talked about his water and how a lot of his fish, they go vertical, kind of dap for them in water that's not so clear. And it sparked my interest and to find water purposely that was skinny and not so clear. And so I found flats along Lake Erie, up in Saginaw Bay, up along Lake Huron, and flats that are just different, that have more of a murky water that I can use that approach. And I've found that it does really help to have that murk in the water to really get up vertical on these spooky fish. And that's, when you're purposely targeting carp, that's kind of how I utilize that. Not so much for other fish.
Today's episode is sponsored by Togens Fly Shop. Togens Fly Shop provides superior quality products at a great price. They have also a great YouTube channel that you can check out right now with new fly tying tutorials each week. Togens also has you covered if you're looking for unique in-house products, and they also support many of the great brands out there that you know and trust. It's been fun connecting with Justin and the family over the years now, and it's been really cool. Great local fly shop. Togens is also offering their fly tying box, where they send out materials at a regular cadence where you don't even have to think of it. You just open the mailbox, and there's your Togens pack. And I recently made an order through Togens, and the experience is always perfect. They've got you covered if you ever have questions or need any help, whether that's a YouTube tutorial or connecting with them personally. Since 2005, Togens has been over-delivering on customer service, and it's time for you to check out Togens Buzz for yourself. You can head over to wetflyswing.com/Togens right now to check out their diverse selection of products today. You support this podcast by clicking through that link to Togens online. That's Togens, Togens. Okay, back to the show.
So let's chat a little bit about their awareness zone. Like, so, if you're a saltwater guide, and I always get yelled at by the guide, like, put it on their nose, put it in this 4-foot circle, right? And we talked a little bit about you going vertical, but do you ever get to the point where you make a long cast, or is that something that you feel is not really controllable, that's not effective?
All the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's your short game is just as important as your long game. So the majority of the bowfin are caught in a very short game. That can be really challenging. But we had plenty of bowfin this weekend that were casted to 40-foot casts, and bowfin will just come out of nowhere into open water, and you put a cast on, you strip in, you watch it chase down your fly, and that's epic. I love that. I mean, it's really nice to see. But bass, smallmouth bass, when you're on the flats, these are spooky bass, but they're also curious, and they come in fast. And as soon as you see them, and it's not so much the most important thing, I think, for anglers, and the most effective way to take advantage of that is to be able to load a rod fast, to be able to just one haul it and shoot your line, 60 feet. That's the pinnacle, right? We want to get there, because that's going to really be effective in those scenarios. And we're doing that all day long. We're casting to fish. We're casting to drum. We're setting up on drum and setting up on carp that are out in the open. And, I will take that angler, and I'll look at their cast, and I'll know this is what they can do comfortably and accurately. And I'll try to maximize the distance to where they can get it done. And if that angler has an 80-foot accurate cast, all the better. So we'll play that game based on the skill level, and try to improve also as we go along.
Well, that's awesome. That's sort of the same game I play, evaluating skill set, and you just hone the day in as you go. But we should probably back up and touch 2 bullet points. Like, how shallow of a water we fish? Because we talked about skinny water. So It's obvious that when it's muddy, but let's just say, depth wise, what are you talking? Like, where are you fishing? We forgot to say that.
Yeah. So I will be in anywhere from 6 inches to about 5 feet. Typically, it's somewhere in between that. 3 feet is where we like to stay, but the landscape's constantly changing, and a lot of times those changing landscapes are what we look for. We look for anything that's like a dredged out channel, any sort of drop off, any sort of shelf within a flat that's a structure. The beautiful thing about the Great Lakes shoreline is the Great Lakes are flowing. They're moving. There's tributaries. There's inlets. And that's something that's fun also to pull along and to discover, because those are little bottlenecks where life tends to flourish a little bit better. But having those depth changes is something that we stick close to. And I find that a lot of times the bigger fish do come from those depth changes, especially in the earlier months and through June and into early July. And then the fish kind of get a little bit more settled on the flats into July and August. And we're fishing more consistently, more skinny water.
Okay, that's awesome. And so you said the 60-foot one back cast, let it go. shooting head, is there a line, like a go-to line that you're using for this that you could recommend?
Yeah, my favorite so far is SA bass, the bass
Okay.
bass bug. That's been because again, we haven't gotten to fly design yet, but the sink rate of the fly is really important. That fly can't just hover down, like it needs to get down to the bottom fairly quickly
Ah,
because the window is so short for the fish that's oriented at the bottom. And we're this boat and we're approaching the fish on a flat, it's clear water. It's gonna see us eventually. And you can almost start a time clock. And I know, like, you've got 10 seconds to like get this done. And so you have to make the cast, the fly has to get in the zone. And as you're playing the fish, you have to get that fish interested in the fly. And drum on the flats are different than drum in the main lake. They tend to have, we fished a drum that are virtually blind sometimes, that have cataracts on their eyes, or drum that are highly aware and very spooky, and drum that'll act like a bass and run down a fly. But every drum's a little different. But the key is to get that fly down in their zone on the bottom, tick it across the bottom in a way that they see it. And once they see that fly and they turn on it and they're engaged, there's a sigh of relief on the boat. And so that getting to that zone is so important with the sink rate. And so we need a fly line that's going to turn over a fly that's going to have that weight to it. And some of the bonefish lines and stuff like that are great because they land so soft on the water, but they're not so good for casting these bigger flies. And the saltwater bead chain eye flies they're perfect for that, but those don't work so well in our scenarios.
that's great info, because that's probably the widest question I get asked. Like, people have like one line, and I really say you really can't have just one line unless you know exactly what you're doing and you're a
Mhm.
specialist and you've already narrowed it down. But let's dive into, you talked about these weighted flies. Maybe you could just cover, I have what I call my guide program, is I have one control fly. Like you said, I have a fly that I know that catches everything. I have
Mhm.
one client that always has that on. And then
Mhm.
I have the crash test dummy, which means
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
crash test dummy, if you're in that wheelhouse, I'm going to start opening up the box and just start putting on some random stuff, because you never
Yeah.
know, right? But sometimes it's not good to be the crash test dummy. But
Right.
maybe you
Sometimes it's
could,
great.
could be great,
Right.
especially when fishing sucks, right? But why don't you why don't you just touch base? You don't got to give away any secret flies, but maybe just give the listeners a couple little intels where you want to start, because you are a badass fly tire too. So
Oh,
let's
thanks,
do that.
man. Dude, I don't think I'm gonna say this with pretty good confidence. I've probably tied the same fly a handful of times in a row. Every fly I tie is different. Every fly I tie, I have to add something to it. And I don't know. I love the creation of flies. I'm constantly having ideas. And so that said, I have flies that work, and I tie those flies consistently. And the difference between each one might be a color, or the color of the rubber legs, or some little sort of dubbing that I add as a different little flare, or some sort of little tweak that I do that no one would really notice. However, it's just something in me that, like, it's just really difficult to tie a batch of this same fly. And I've never really sold flies. I've never tied for production. It's all for my own fun. And I put a lot into the flies that I tie. And yeah, sometimes it hurts when they get lost. But whatever, it's cool. I just, it's just how I've always done it. I've always put a lot into my flies. I've always, really, the whole guide fly thing. I'm starting to get that a little bit more, and it doesn't really matter. But I still have a hard time. I still have to make my flies look amazing to me. I'm only satisfied if that's the case. Now, the design, and that's what you're asking me, the design of my flies. The
Yeah, like
sink rate is basically medium medium lead eyes, medium size. The larges are usually too big. I just got these Fulling Mill. They're medium size lead eyes, but they're made out of tungsten, so they look like the traditional lead eyes, but they're a little heavier. And we did trial that out. The plop is a big factor with flies. So if you can tell me a fly that's heavy and sinks really fast, that doesn't have a plop, I'm all ears. But that's going to be a thing that happens when you have a heavy fly that stinks. Is you're going to have a fly that makes a loud noise when it splashes on the water. And so the fly that I've come to really fish consistently has a shank in the front, and I'm not good with the millimeters of the shank. My dyslexic brain has a hard time remembering all the specific measurements of hook sizes and stuff like that. But it's relatively small, and then a relatively small hook off the back. That's I've been into the Ahrex minnow hook lately. I found that's a nice sturdy hook, size let's say 4, and then a medium dumbbellized. And on that fly, I like to mix synthetics. I like synthetics because they sink fast, and they don't really hold water. They don't get waterlogged, and so I will use everything from a dubbing loop to certain chenille materials. I work in some flash. I like to work in rubber legs because I know the drum feed by feel too. So they have highly sensitive mouths. And so just something that can kind of tickle that fish and they'll put their face right on the fly. Like they won't eat it, but they will actually follow it and put their chin on it. And these are drum that are sometimes visually challenged. And that fly has to kind of vibrate just right for it to make the decision to inhale it. And so with that in mind, the shank and the hook, the reason for that is you have this sort of business in the back. You have this hook in the back, and that hook is loose. It moves, and so the dumbbell eyes are attached to the shank, and you have this hook in the back. And for me, what that helps with is that hook kind of tends to find the mouth a little bit better. And these fish will also eat and spit very very quickly. And so for reflexes and stuff like that, it just kind of ups the hookup rate. And that's a design that I've come up with. I've called it the Flats Jordan because I did a series of them that I copied the colors of actual Michael Jordan shoes, Air Jordan shoes.
Yeah.
And I call it the Flats Jordan. It kind of looked like the shoe, and those fish all caught drum. It was kind of fun. So that was the name of the, like the Air Jordan, the Flats Jordan. But that's been a design that I've kind of stuck with. And that's also really specifically helped with bowfin too, because bowfin have such hard palates. Sometimes that hook that's able to kind of be a free agent can find the softer areas of the mouth a little easier. And again, I've fished that fly for a while. It seems to work with me. I fish with plenty of guys that tie their own flies that get it done just as well. So I'm not sure exactly if it's a thing, but for me, it seems to be. So I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, that's some great intel. I'm all for rubber. Like my go-to flies always have some rubber in it, or my best.
I love rubber.
Yep. And then the cool thing you said about tungsten eyes, not only does it, sink fast, and I was up at, Mike Schultz's shop, and he was like, I was like, dude, what about he pointed me to those tungsten eyes. And we do a lot of like long distance, just cast to the abyss. They do not break in the middle as readily as a lead eye does. So after a while,
absolutely. Yeah. Pounding rocks.
And just even a really hard angler casting at distance, after about 3 hours, that fly, if you don't lose it, will break the eyes in half with a lead.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
The tungsten is just a little more durable. So
yeah.
That's some great intel on the flies. Let me ask you one last question before we start wrapping things up. You're a musician, you play drums. Does it make you more of a creative angler as far as on the water or tying? I can see it already when you designed a Jordan fly series. So I can see the creativity, but maybe, does it really? I can tell you're really artsy, man.
It's just part of my thing. I mean, growing up dyslexic, my brain is the right side of my brain drives the ship, and that's how I've always been. And it's a gift, it's a thing that, you have to learn how you learn. And I'm a visual learner. I'm a visual person. I've always been into art. My dad actually made a living as an artist for a time. And so fishing, fly fishing, especially one of the reasons why I took to it so strongly was it was an extension of that creativity. It's just as music was, as I always drew as a kid and I thought I was going to be an artist at some point. Music found me in my teenage years, and I've always stuck with it. It's been an outlet to pursue that scratch that itch. And I've played in bands for years and years and years, and as long as I can remember, really. And it just keeps me young. Fishing, I think the question was, does being a musician help with fishing, or does what was the specific question?
Well, you're just
it's an extension.
Person. It's like you're a creative person. So like just the way you explained your flies, like how you're creating, not one is the same.
Yeah.
That's the musician part. Like
it's all related.
Yes. Where some guys, like you said, it's like, I got 3 flies. You're going to put these on. We're fishing all day because they work. That's it. Where you're like, right? But that's way cool, man. One last thing is, I always like to touch base. Is there anything conservation wise that's within your geographic grasp that you think people need to shout out about, or something you're concerned about, or is it all fairly okay? Or what's your thoughts on that, man?
I think one of the things that I've noticed that I've actually been a little bit upset with myself with, because in the early days when we were fishing for drum, I didn't know how much handling a drum could actually hurt a drum. And I've seen a lot of the same fish over the years on the flats. And I think one of the things that I really try to do is really focus on how I handle fish, and do it in a way that where you're not affecting their skin, you're not keeping them out of the water. If they flop, have an exit strategy to where they don't flop into the boat and start bouncing around. I've seen drum that have a skin sort of that seems like they've been handled a little bit, and I'm not sure if that's me. I'm not sure if it's I've seen all kinds of funky looking fish out there, but I really I try to practice a style of handling fish that really promotes less, although it's nice to get those shots, and most of the fish are rough fish. Bowfin are perfect example of fish you can hold out of water, and obviously we get those shots of the drum too, but we do it in a way that I want to set it up to where the hook's in the mouth. If that fish flops, you're throwing it in the water, and once we're done with the picture, you throw it in the water, and then I release I take the hook out in the water. We keep that fish as wet as we can, and using a bigger net, obviously, that allows me to net the fish. My basket's big enough where I can just rest it on my boat. That fish is in the water, breathing in the net still. It's not out of the water. With a smaller net, which was what I fished with for the first probably 4 years of being out there. Now I have this big net, which is upping that game and pursuing just a more conservative or conservation minded approach to these fish, and treating them as good as we can, because we do beat up on them, and over time that toll, it has to be there. I mean, it's going to be there. So, we want them to be around. We want to be as healthy as possible. We see a lot of trash, and that's something that has been mentioned. I'd like to do some flats, clean up, and I try to keep my footprint as minimal as possible. And if I see something, obviously, if I can put it in my boat and haul it off, get it to the trash can where it should be, I can. But there's some giant trash out there. There's everything from lawnmowers to God knows what. That'd be a little bit more of a project.
That's awesome, Dave. That's great intel with everything. That's just being, taking care of our own little ecosystems and our water systems is super important. If I see a glittery balloon 4 miles away, that came from some birthday party, we're making a beeline to the birthday balloon, even though it's not where, we're going to go fishing. We go pick it up. So we're in the same boat as you, protect our own waters, but I really got to thank you, man. All this intel you're willing to share with us on this episode. Anybody can reach out to you. Feel free to reach out to Dave, but I want to thank all the listeners to listen to this Great Lakes podcast episode. And the next time, you're thinking about a fishing trip, you might want to explore some cool waters like Dave and myself in the backcountry or somewhere different on the Great Lakes. If you have any questions, reach out to Dave, right? Dave at the podcast, or connect with me at greatlakesflyfishing.com or on Instagram at Great Lakes Dude, or hit up Dave Hurley himself on Instagram. I think that's the best way, right, Dave?
Yeah, I believe it's Dave Hurl is the handle, but absolutely, yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Sorry for that, but thanks again, and thanks for everybody for the listen, man.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it, man.
That was Jeff Liskay on the Great Lakes podcast, part of the Wet Fly Swing podcast and Swing Outdoors. Big thanks to Jeff this week and for putting this together and for his special guest. Stay tuned as we're going to be knocking another one out of the park next week. And I don't know if it's going to be an interview. I'm going to leave that up to Jeff to decide. And I think we're going to be getting rid of my outro and intro as well. It's going to be all Jeff from here on out. So glad you had a chance to stop in, and I'm excited to let Jeff fully take the reins here and keep this thing rolling. You can send any feedback to myself or Jeff at any time. We're out here, social media or email, easy to do it. And we would love to hear from you. One quick reminder, we've got the Steelhead School coming back, and we're going to be heading back out to Lake Erie, South Shores of Lake Erie with Jeff and Rick Custich this year. So if you want to check in on that, you can head over to wetflyswing.com/steelheadschool right now, and you can sign up there and check it out. We should have a few spots still remaining. If you're lucky here, I know this one is definitely a hot ticket. So I'd love to see you on the water and get out there with Jeff and Rick and all the great guides this year and some folks from the podcast. Can't wait to get on the water again and hear Jeff's next podcast from the Great Lakes Dude. We are out of here. Thanks again for listening. We will see you soon.